Okay, if you're at $60,000 a year or like
Right.
above, that's probably a little more than the cost of having a like full-time, like very smart instructor for your child or for
Correct.
your teenager or whatever, right? Like, so you could literally assign every student like a really good instructor to teach them all these subjects, full time, like no other students, just one student.
Yeah.
And it would seem like you'd get potentially a better outcome with that method. So like once you get to that level of absurdity, it's probably time to take a look at it. And
Well, let's talk.
yeah,
Let's talk about that for a second, because there's actually a lot of historical evidence, Ben, for what you just said. So, so one is if you go back in time, aristocratic education in prior societies, it was always one-to-one tutoring. Like the royal family, like the offspring of royal families were always tutored one-to-one.
yeah.
And then you have these amazing historical precedents, and Alexander the Great is kind of the apotheosis of this, because his tutor was Aristotle,
Yeah,
right? And which is pretty good, right? And then even like the Greek philosophers like Socrates and all those guys, their day job was, what they did in the mornings was they did one-on-one tutoring
right.
to kids in Athens, and then in the afternoon they hung out at the Agora and talked about things. But their job was actually tutoring, and that was obviously an amazing civilization. So like there's a lot of like specific historical precedent, and then there's this thing in the education research which is really striking. So one of the things in education research generally is that it basically fails. It's like basically sort of all of the attempts to come up with systemic interventions to improve educational outcomes basically fail, and this has been the case for many
In terms
decades.
of like pedagogy and things beyond tutors, is that how you think about it?
Yeah, they just don't. Most things you want to do, whether it's Head Start or this or that, or electronic, laptops in the classroom, or you just name any number of things where people have tried to inject money or new practices into the classroom at any level, and basically it's the null hypothesis keeps proving out over and over, which is they just don't change anything. And so and actually, it's funny that the Gates Foundation actually, right, it was just very heavily involved in education philanthropy, actually put out a report a couple of years ago where they kind of go through this in detail, and it's very kind of discouraging in the sense of it's really like, look, it's easy to say like a good teacher will do better, but it's much harder to say we're going to make 1 million teachers better, right? So even the things that work in the micro level, they just don't scale. There is one exception. There is one educational intervention technique that reliably it generates better outcomes, and in fact, it generates what are called 2 sigma better outcomes, so 2 standard deviations. So it's an intervention that routinely takes kids who would score at the 50th percentile of outcome and moves them to the 99th percentile of outcome, and it's one-on-one tutoring.
Oh yeah, one-on-one. Yeah. This is also true with autistic kids. They've done similar research, and the one thing that works is one-on-one tutoring. Or the one thing that's proven of all the interventions consistently. There is a professor at UCLA, Ivar Lovaas, who kind of proved that out. So it's very consistent across all types of students, interestingly.
Right, exactly. And so if you want to look at, there's this thing called the Bloom 2 sigma effect. The researcher who did the work on this, his name is Bloom. So it's called the Bloom 2 sigma effect. And it's kind of this great white whale of education, which is like, wow, we actually know how to make education look much better than it is. It's just historically been economically impractical. There's just no way that you could afford to have a one-to-one tutor for every
Until
student.
now.
Until
that's where the student loan money should go to.
Quite possibly, right?
Yeah. Well, by the way, it's also good. Like, one of the big kind of critiques of academia, I think, from people like us, but more so, it's just that like when you go into academia, you're in this sort of bubble of a world. So if you're kind of coming up with new social science or theories or what have you, you're testing them among like, you're kind of wrapped in people like yourselves. But if you go back and you say, well, Socrates' ideas at least had to stand up to his students in a much more direct way because it's a one-on-one, like they're going to have questions with us, where I think that if you're kind of elevate yourself to, here I am, king of the class, and, I'm going to give you a grade. So you better not, say anything nasty about my research. Like that's a very different kind of a thing, I think. So it could be helpful on both sides in a way. Although it doesn't quite take the expenses down, but it would hold them steady. Or maybe you have one tutor for every 3 students or something, right?
Yeah, but look, it's also the reference. Like, and look, the expectation I think has to be that look, if current trends continue, then tuition will keep rising at 3x the rate of inflation or something like that. And so we'll be having
what a tutor would cost. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have a follow up to this podcast, 5 or 10 years from now, and it'll have crossed the $1 million mark, right, per student, right, and at that point, the economics actually become quite overwhelming, in the direction of one-to-one instruction. So sitting here today, it sounds crazy that you would make this switch, but it's starting to sound sane, and so it's worth it's interesting to at least have like a potential, like an index to potential competitive system, at least for the sanity check.